So in this section, we're going to talk about running visual end-to-end tests. We're going to use visual end-to-end tests to achieve our application looking correctly for our end users. So in this section, we'll learn what it is visual end-to-end testing and how to implement it for a web application. We saw that our current test coverage hasn't changed, but the requirement that we're about to tackle is making sure that our application looks as expected in Chrome and Safari on the most popular resolution. Visual testing, it's basically ensuring that our application appears as we want it to appear to the users. It's a combination of manual testing, functional testing, automated testing in a bunch, and it has a bunch of different advantages. Some of the advantages of visual testing is it's much easier than end-to-end testing, as you'll see from the code. It can validate an entire page in a single line of code. You can check how an app looks in different browsers and resolutions. It's more stable than end-to-end tests, and it can help reduce the size of our end-to-end test suite. There's a much deeper discussion of this topic here, this URL, if we need to, but I think through the presentation and the actions, you'll kind of get a great idea of what visual testing is actually about. There are many different tools to use for visual testing, but they all kind of have a very similar workflow. There's a test suite that executes, and let me zoom in for you all to make it even better. There's a test suite that executes, and it runs some commands. The commands are something like opening up a page and then capturing a snapshot of that page. And so that's those steps. Here, you specify the browser, the resolution that you want to run it on, and then those screenshots are compared against a baseline. If a baseline has been previously set and there are differences, we're notified that there are differences, and then we have to decide whether those differences are bugs or new functionality. Though they're rarely false positives. There are some false positives that can occur when our applications are not fully rendered before a snapshot is captured, but most of the time, the failure happens either it's a requirements change and we just need to update our baseline, or it's an actual bug and we need to resolve it. And so that happens in that step here. And again, as I said, as we dive into the tool and the workflow, that'll be easier to understand. So the tooling that we're going to use for our end-to-end visual tests is WebDriver IO, which I saw that many people are very familiar with, and Screener, which is a visual testing tool that can automatically detect visual regressions, and it plugs in very nicely into WebDriver IO. Cool. So you guys just follow along with me as we set up a visual test. But first, let me kind of just explain the basic layout of how we're going to do that. So continuing to work out of the same folder, and WebDriver IO was already installed for us. So if we go to package.json, you'll see we have a bunch of WebDriver IO services using version 7, which is the latest version that was just released not so long ago. Okay. When WebDriver IO is installed, the tests go into test specs folder. Okay. Remember, Cypress tests go in here. The typical structure for WebDriver IO tests is to go into a specs folder. And so here you see I have a visual spec here. We can actually add a new one together just to kind of show you what that looks like. I should have created, we can just say here, exercise.spec.js. Okay. So this will be our visual test. And then we're just gonna copy and paste this code into our file. I'm trying to go a little bit slower so that we can all do this together. Cool. So what's happening in this code? It's using the typical describe it blocks that we're so used to in JavaScript. And here we're just saying that let's make sure that my application should look correct. And what are the steps that we're performing is first we're navigating to the URL. The URL, just like in Cypress for WebDriver IO, it's set in the WebDriver IO config.js. Here towards the bottom, we'll see our base URL. It can easily be overridden through command line parameters. Next, we're executing a visual init command. This basically starts a kind of like a session you can think of in Screener. And next, we're going to capture a snapshot of a page that we just opened. So we opened this page. So now we're capturing a snapshot of it. And we're giving that snapshot a name. So because we're opening this page here first, right? I'm just calling it home page. You can call it whatever you want, but you want it to reflect kind of the purpose behind that page. And I'll show you how that's reflected in the UI of Screener when we're done. Next, now that we captured a snapshot, we want to end our test. That's it. If we have more pages, I would recommend for visual testing, if you have a bunch of pages that are important to the business, that are publicly facing and you want to see in many resolutions, I would just continue to navigate to different URLs and capturing snapshots, right? Let's say we added one extra page here. So we would do like, let's say, about us or contact us page, right? Contact page. And then I would just take this and I just add another step, capture the snapshot and call it contact page. And keep doing that through all the relevant pages. And I would do it in a single test, because then what I would do is I would take this test and I would run it across multiple different browsers and operating systems, because our application is responsive, and make sure that all those pages look good in all those different resolutions. And then at the end, again, like I said, we're ending the test, saying, okay, test is done. And then we're just checking that there were no exceptions, no error messages inside of this results object. Okay? Let me get rid of this because it doesn't exist. And before we run this, I want to also show you the WebDriver IO config, what I was talking about. So in the WebDriver IO config, there are several important areas that are already set up for you, but I just want to talk about them. So there are these visual options. All you need is the API key that comes from Screener. Oh, by the way, I've been talking about Screener, but never showed you all. That's at Screener.io. Hopefully, you all have an account already set up. If not, no big deal, just follow along. This is what the Screener.io looks like, okay? You can see we have a project name that we set up. A project name is basically, think of it as relating to your application. So we are working on testing for good. So I named the testing for good. And that shows up here in the UI, testing for good. Next, we have source options. Because we're using virtual machines to run these tests, we need a cloud provider to run this. And so we're just setting our Sauce username and access key from Sauce Labs. Hopefully you were able to retrieve those. If not, let me show you how to get those. If you go to your account, your user settings, inside of there, you will see your username and access key. Just copy and paste those into, oh, of course, if you're doing it locally, you'll set them in your bash profile. And if you're doing it in CI, I already showed you how to set that up in your CI. So you do need to set those up in two places if you're running them locally. And to put it in your bash profile, hopefully you all know how to do that, but let me Oh, I need to navigate to the root. I'm not a Bash profile expert. There it is. There's all my API keys for you all to use. So this is what a Bash profile looks like. You can see I have my username, access key, and API key here. Say, of course, you can also just even set it here, right, by exporting it in command line and then setting it temporarily. Okay, so that's how you set all that information. And then here, there's another short little section that's also important. Same user and key, no problem. This part is important here. So because we're going to be running our application on localhost and it's not deployed yet, we need the virtual machines to talk to our local host, right? Because for example, none of you can access my localhost environment because you don't have an HTTPS connection to it. Yeah, Larry, sorry about that. I thought Screener had a way to sign up for an account, but I guess you have to do a demo. Yeah, if you want to request a demo, request it. If not, I guess if you can just follow along. I'm sorry that it doesn't have just a simple sign up, which is frustrating. But yeah, for those of you that don't have a Screener account, if you can just follow along, it'll be okay. I'll show everything. And sorry to get distracted. So this basically establishes a secure HTTPS connection from the virtual machine that's going to be running the visual test to our local host environment. And so this installs what's called Saucectl. It's a secure HTTPS proxy, and then it allows that secure connection to the machine. The rest, it's all kind of, let's see, WebDriver IO stuff. You guys, a lot of you know it. The rest of you can just look up the documentation. Here's just the configuration to point to Screener. And then here's probably the most interesting and most useful part from visual testing is setting an array here of the capabilities that I want to run my test or test against. I currently have only one test written, right? Of course, we may have multiple tests written, but every one of those is going to run across this desktop combination, Chrome on Windows 10 latest version, running on this resolution. If you Google it and check, this is the most popular desktop resolution. Now, of course, that's depends on the business, right? Maybe your business cares about that. Maybe your business only functions on IE, and that's the only thing you want to test. But for our web application, which is a modern front-end web application, I want to target the most used resolutions and make sure that it looks okay. My recommendation from testing experience there, I would say you don't need to target all the resolutions, right? There are some resolutions that will provide you 1% of the users. So the question is like, is that worth your time to run those tests and process the results for 1% of the users? You know, of course, that depends on the business, but kind of you have to sit and weigh those weigh those advantages versus disadvantages to decide on your visual testing strategy. And then here, the other one I have is Safari running on Mac in also the most popular resolution. So as many of you astutely pointed out, that's also how we can target mobile devices, right? So we can start adding stuff like if we wanted to run on an iPhone 12, we can point it to an iPhone 12 viewport size. Here's a 12 Pro Max, for example. Here's that viewport size. And so now we would have our screenshots rendering in those resolutions. Okay, cool. So enough talking. Let's run this. Let me kill this one, open a new one. Make sure you're in the correct directory. CD testing for charity, my React app. And then the command to run visual tests, which I wrapped in a script here in the package JSON, just show you all, npm run test visual, which you can see does that, just points at our config file. So you can see it started 4 workers. Why is it running 4 workers? I don't know why, but let's see what happens. So now it's running the tests. If we come back here to screener and refresh, there it is. You can see that now we have tests being executed here. You can see testing for good running. It shows the logs here on what it's doing. And when it finishes, I'm super curious why it's 4 sessions, but let's see what happens. It's 1 test, 2. Did I mess up the config? No, I don't think so. Anyways, when it finishes, you're going to get this result. So this is kind of what I wanted to show you all about. We've never set a baseline with this application. And so the very first state that screenshots come in is a new state, because it's saying, hey, look, you have this My React app. You can see this is named the home page. This is where it came from, right? We captured the snapshot of our home page. So this is what that looks like in this resolution here, which we, based on our research, discovered is the most popular resolution for desktop. The question is this acceptable as a baseline for us and our testing purposes? If it is, we will accept it. So we're going to come here and say accept. And now from this point forward, this will be the baseline that's used for a comparison of new iterations of the application. And then we'll go to the next one. This one is on Safari Mac. You can see what that looks like. Looks perfectly good to me. We're going to accept that as well. Okay, so that's that. We've set baselines. So now the question is, how will they look actually after we're done? So cool. Let's quickly fill out our test coverage here. By the way, I hope for a bunch of people that wasn't like too much. I feel like I presented a lot of information there. If you have questions, definitely let me know. I am happy to answer anything I may not have clarified well. Just feel free to throw them in the chat. So here we use Chrome and Safari on most popular resolutions. Like I said, we probably can break it up into 2 requirements, but no problem. This is a visual test, and we used WebDriver IO and Screener. Okay. The other thing kind of that I was talking about as we were writing the test was, hopefully you saw how simple the test actually is, right? There is no element locations. There is no like potential problems that come along with that. It's really open page, capture snapshot, open page, capture snapshot. And you just do that for all the pages that you want. And then you just run that across all the resolutions that you want. And it captures the entire page. You get to see it. And if there are any weird differences, we'll be able to spot those. And I'll show you all examples of that. But this looks good. We did with visual test and WebDriver IO and Screener. Cool. Was curious if anyone was. Can you also action on UI? Oh yeah, great question, Paul. Absolutely. You can absolutely action on UI elements during the test, because you're using WebDriver IO. Really, everything it's WebDriver IO with a combination of a few screener commands. You can interact with the browser just like normal. So, for example, maybe you have pages behind the login. So open up your page, perform the appropriate WebDriver IO commands to log in, and then capture the next page. And then you can do whatever you want. If you want to just pull up, if you want to pull up a pop-up, right? Then the pop-up happens when you click a button, and then capture your application in that state. You can do that as well.
So Nikolai, we also have a question kind of along the same idea, same from Chen, which is, how does Screener capture longer pages that require scrolling?
Oh, wonderful question, Chen. So let's talk about that. That is actually a super common scenario, and I'm really happy you asked it. So if you come here to the docs and go to Visual End-to-End Docs, let me see here. So first, by default, Screener will automatically try to scroll to a page of a large size, through the entire page, and we'll try to capture it. In fact, why don't we see if we want to simulate? Let me give you the answer, and then I'll see if I want to mess with the code to make it possible. Because code is like live coding always breaks. So automatically it'll try. But if you need to do more than that, there are a few ways to do it. So first, you can set here's one of the properties that you can set: scroll and stitch screenshots. You can enable it to true. I haven't had to use it, but it might be necessary for your application. All the applications are so different, So that's one option. You would place this guy would be at your WebDriver IO level here, right? So visual options. So you just add here, scroll and stitch screenshot, right? However you spell that, scroll and stitch, and then you just set it to true. And so then obviously that would apply for every single test. And you can also do it on a snapshot command. Let me show you that. Snapshot. Oh no, sorry. Thinking of totally different thing. Yeah, that's how you would do it. And it would be good enough. But the reason why I mentioned the snapshot command is there's the opposite of that, where you just want to capture a snapshot of an element, and you can do that with a snapshot command and pass in options. And if you want to, for example, just only look at the image of our application, you would just pass in the selector and then crop to the header. And so that would be there. And that would look, like this. You would just do here, snapshot, and then you would add your option here. And then if you wanted to just capture a specific element, you can. Yeah, any other questions? Yeah, you're welcome. Yeah, and in fact, let me put my money where my mouth is and see what happens when we have a huge screener, a huge page. What did I change here? So that. I'm gonna mess with our app. If it doesn't work out, I won't spend too much time on it, but let's try it. Our app, what do we want to do? We can just do multiple images. Let's do multiple images that are like really extended. And then let me see our app. There it is. So kind of long, right? You kind of have to scroll and stitch. So let's make it a little bigger just for fun. There we go. I think, to be honest, there's like a limit. At some point, it stops scrolling if it's too big. But it's something you kind of just play around with. And so now notice I don't have in my WebDriver IO config, I don't have scroll and stitch screenshots set. So let's run our visual test. And this is actually a really cool exercise too, because you all will see what happens when our application is updated. Siva asks if you can mock APIs for authentication. Siva, what do you mean by mock the APIs? Usually, mocking the APIs, you do that for like unit testing. Do you mean like, do you want to hit API endpoints to log in and then capture the snapshot? You mean you want to like bypass the UI by logging in with API? Let me know what you mean. So it's running. You can see it's failing, which is fine. Let's go to our screener and see what's going on. Testing for good. You can see previously 2 accepted. Let's see what happens with this build. Yeah, so yeah, Siva, WebDriver IO. Yeah, WebDriver IO is for functional browser testing. I don't believe, at least I've never seen, an API interaction mechanism with WebDriver IO. I typically interact with APIs through like, you can do it with Cypress, or you can do it with like fetch node module. And so then you would need to include that in your tests, do that authentication, and then once you do the authentication, then you will spin up your browser and perform the operations. You definitely can do it. You just have to figure out how to combine the two. I actually have a bunch of cool examples of bypassing API logging that I've done in a previous workshop, Siva. It's actually in the same exact repository. If you go to automation best practices and login testing, there's an entire documentation on what we did, how we did it, and why. You might want to look into that, and then that'll help you with your bypassing. The only thing there, like I said, I use Cypress, so then you would need to figure out like how do you do visual testing with Cypress. That part, I don't know. I usually use WebDriver IO and Screener for that part. Okay, cool. So anyways, our tests ran. We can see that 2 have changed, and we'll see what happens to them. So you can see our previously version, right? And you can see that Screener highlights this image, which has changed. That's actually part of the smart hybrid div of Screener. It doesn't highlight the entire page, even though we can see here that a bunch of stuff has been added. It highlights just the image that has changed because it knows that, hey, there's just more of these and not this part has changed, for example. And it looks like it staged the entire thing for us, right? Or maybe not. Maybe it's missing a certain part. Maybe it stops at a certain point. It's like 6 1/4. How many did I put in there? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Yeah, so maybe our app was too long, and so then maybe in that case we would want to add colon stage screenshot and make sure that it's capturing the whole thing. On that as well, the other thing that I've seen people being tripped up with in visual testing is applications that have lazy loading. For example, my blog has lazy loading. So if we do, I'll show you how that works. So as you scroll stuff into view, things will appear. See that? See how those images appeared? And here, boom, they appear like that. If your applications have that, then where I've seen people get tripped up is you first need to make sure that you scroll to the bottom of the page and load your entire page. So you do that just using some JavaScript commands. Scroll to the bottom of the page, and then you can scroll back to the top and then capture the snapshot, because now the entire page is rendered and it'll capture this. Well, if you don't do this and there's lazy loading, what's going to happen is we're trying to stitch the screenshot for you, but it's not fully loaded, and so you'll get like strips of images loaded and it'll just look weird. So just pay attention to that. That's one of the kind of like false positives that you might get from visual testing, is the rendering of the application is important before you capture the snapshot. Cool. Any other questions here in terms of what I covered? Yeah, I agree with you that, Daniel. I think lazy loading should be handled by screener. I mentioned it to the team. Hopefully they listen to me. Okay, feel free to continue asking questions about visual. You guys kind of got a sneak preview into this, but I want you all to try and change the image of the application on your own. The instructions on that are here. I'll leave them up, but basically put in whatever image you want. If you want to put in an image of yourself into the application, you can, or whatever image you want, and then rerun the visual tests just so you can see what happens when the application is updated. I'll give you all a moment to try and do this. Yeah, Siva, Cypress and Screener don't work together right now. I know the Screener team is working on that feature. I think that's one of the next major features they're releasing, but no, right now they don't. It would be nice though, for sure. I would prefer that combination. Personally, I like Cypress over WebDriver IO because Cypress can do functional browser testing, but it can also hit APIs, which is super nice. And I think they're even working on releasing component testing. Maybe it's even already released. But once they do that, now I can do with one tool, I can do component testing, visual testing, and functional testing, and I'm good to go. So that's what makes me happy.
We have a question about Cypress. I'll let you handle this though, Nikolai. The question is it possible to execute tests in parallel using Cypress?
No, it is not, unless you pay them money. Cypress is free, but if you want to run tests in parallel, that is a paid feature. So let's see if they show that here. Oh, interesting. They say you get parallelization now. As far as I remember and know, parallelization is a paid feature. You pay for parallelization and you pay for their dashboard. I don't know if they changed it recently, but that's how it is. But if you wanted to run Cypress tests in parallel, actually, Sauce Labs, we have a solution called Saucectl. So there, we allow you to run any framework in parallel. Saucectl, I'll share that with you. It's if you use Sauce Labs, it's part of the account. Saucectl supports a ton of the most popular JavaScript frameworks. All of these you can see which it supports, that's one of the nice things about it. You can use Saucectl to do all of these types of testing, even mobile testing, native mobile testing, just using kind of the same configuration format. And then it all runs obviously in the same place, same dashboard, same videos and all that kind of stuff. So you can bypass Cypress's parallelization by using Saucectl, Cypress integration, and then you'll be able to run tests in parallel. And here I'll drop you. Oh no, this is not. Let me see. Here's how to get started. Oh, Cypress. Yeah, it's all here. You can. Joshua, what are your thoughts on Cucumber?
Cucumber is a very popular approach for writing test automation and maintaining test automation. My opinion is if Cucumber is most helpful if you are invested in the behavior-driven development framework overall. So if you're focusing on collaboration between product and development and test, if you're following other practices like the so-called Three Amigos, where product owners, developers, and testers all collaborate and come up with test cases and acceptance test criteria together, Cucumber can be helpful. Outside of that, it is not as helpful as other approaches, I guess is my short, it's an opinion that's out there. So yeah, you can add some more color if you'd like, Nikolai. But.
No, I think your polite Canadian way of putting it is wonderful. Hey Siva, I shared an article I wrote about Cucumber. Hopefully it'll shed some light for you on the situation and potentially save wasted effort for you and your team. Who here has been successful at updating an image and maybe running it in Screener? Relatively easy. I just wanted everyone here to get a little bit of experience of modifying React code, even making the application a little bit your own, right, and replacing it with something you want. So why don't I already have a preloaded image here of Mia too. So I'm just gonna do Mia JPEG. JPG, if I can spell. Make sure our output's okay. Oh, yeah, because I need. Am I? It's not finding interesting. Let's see. There it is. Cool. Much cuter picture, right? And so then if we do npm run test visual, by this point, you might know already what happens, but again, we'll kind of just go over that workflow for visual testing. Yeah, visual testing, I think for modern day front-end web applications, it's super powerful and it should be in pretty much all of our tool belts because you can see how easy it is to make sure that an application looks correct in whatever resolution or environment you want it in. And it bypasses all those functional tests that many of us used to have to do where we are like checking for elements and making sure that certain images are present. You don't need to do that anymore. You just pull up the page, capture the snapshot. Does it look correct? So if it does look correct, set the baseline. Now you're good to go, and kind of the algorithm behind the scenes does all the work for you. For me, in my ideal test strategy for a web application, I have a bunch of component tests. I maybe have a few or like one or two end-to-end tests, and then I have a bunch of visual tests and different resolutions of my most important business pages. Oh, if there's APIs, that'll add a new category of testing. Like web APIs. Let me get rid of all this and let's see what's happening in Screener. Let's see, it's already captured. Oh yeah, there it is. So you can kind of see, Screener says, hey, look, the difference, right? You replace this image. So this is that wonderful question is this a bug or a feature? In this case, it is a feature. So we're gonna accept this because I want this image to be used from this point forward. If you wanna, by the way, you guys will have more complicated applications than this. You might have many images and many resolution. You can just say accept all selected after you review them. And the cool thing here is actually you can even see the history that has happened. So you can see the changes here that have happened to our image. You can see the history of what has happened and, for example, who has accepted what and when. And you can even ignore things. Maybe you have a banner that's running a sale and there's a countdown timer. You can ignore it. You can ignore it either manually through the UI, or you can ignore it programmatically in your code. If it's, for example, a header on your entire application and you don't care about it, right? You want to ignore the countdown timer, you can put that in your test code so that it always ignores that element. So even though Screener does not do accessibility testing, WebDriver IO does do accessibility testing, and I was hoping to get to it today, but the 3 hours is unfortunately not enough time to cover all of this. So my goal is for a future automation best practices with JavaScript workshop to get to like accessibility testing and front-end performance testing and security testing as well. Cool. Let's see here. We got like 20 minutes left, so let's finish up. Hopefully everyone was able to do that. We can even add this step to our CI system. I'll show you all how to do that. Again, unfortunately, I think there was no self-service sign up for Screener, but if you wanted to do add visual testing, you would obviously want to add it after the application is totally built. Doing the same thing, navigating to the directory, running the command, and then it's just going to run it in the CI pipeline. And then it'll pass or fail in the CI pipeline, depending on the status of the screenshots. Cool. And then just a quick summary here. Visual end-to-end testing is a simple and efficient way to ensure visual consistency. Hopefully everyone kind of got that. If not, definitely let me know. I'll be happy to explain it. And we use WebDriver IO and Screener to write our visual end-to-end tests.